Hey fam, welcome back to my channel. It's your boy, Kelly Eden, and it's been a while since we've done a DIY project together, but I just finished making this valance for my television. So the idea behind this came from the fact that I really didn't like that my room was feng shui to focus on the television. I felt like it was the center focus of my bedroom, and I didn't really like that, so I wanted to come up with a way to cover up my television when I wasn't using it. So I found this valance at an antique shop nearby that I go to all the time. It was actually meant to be a fireplace awning, and it's solid wood. So I thought I could create this to look more like a puppet show or a stage or even a window or something like that. So that when I finally wanted to use my TV, I could just open it up and there it would be. And then I installed some lights on the back to give it a little bit of extra dimension. I'm really into lighting, so I'm going to show you how I did this. So I'm going to start prepping this guy. I'm going to sand it down just a little bit. Since the lacquer on top of the wood has a little bit of a shine to it, it's going to have a little bit of resistance to the paint. So that's why it's important to sand it down just a little bit, and that gives the wood a little bit of tooth, which means it's going to help the paint stick on there and not chip off or anything like that. It shouldn't take too long, so let's go. So now that I have the piece lightly sanded down, I quickly dusted it off and started prepping the paint. Sorry, there's a good shot of my butt there. A lot of people ask me what type of paint that I use. I just get it from Home Depot, and I use Behr paint, which is a very high quality interior and exterior paint. The formula that I have right now is a matted color, and it's a basically a one coat. So this is very high quality paint, and I actually got it in the paint oops section, which basically means, you know, some people go to Home Depot and they order paint and then it comes out wrong, so then they just put it on the rack and it's basically for a huge discount. So that tub that I had is usually for $130, and I believe I paid maybe $30 for, and it's lasted me a long time. You can see the colors on the wall as well. I've painted it in my house. It's lasted me for about 4 years. So anyway, the first thing that I did is I did a very light coat of this color. It's really good to just kind of give the piece a wash of paint first before going in with heavy paint. The wash basically acts as kind of a primer. Now, even though the paint has a primer inside, it's good to do 2 coats on anything that you're doing. So the first coat should be very light, and then you should just go back over it with another coat that's a little bit more opaque. Doing the floral details definitely took me the longest amount of time, just because the crevices and creases were so deep that I had to really be careful and go in there with a finer tip brush and make sure that I got in there and got all the paint in there without letting it dry or billow or turn into pools. So I had to make sure it was dispensed evenly and it wasn't turning into puddles or like leaking off the sides. So you can see me here going in with a tiny brush and trying to get into all those little nooks and crannies. So this was a little tedious and a little time consuming, but it was definitely worth it. Projects like these tend to take a lot of patience and a lot of tender loving care. I wanted to be really careful to do this piece right because it wasn't an expensive piece. I actually got it for a pretty good deal, but I knew that this piece was hand carved and I knew the person who had carved it, so I wanted to make sure that I respected the piece and just did it right. So this is the part of the process that took the longest. Painting the entire valance took me about 4 hours. So the next day, my friend Wolfgang came over to help me hang the valance. Wolfgang works at the antique shop that I shop at all the time, and he kind of became a friend, and I hire him every once in a while to come help me out around the house. I knew that this piece was very, very heavy and was going to prove a challenge for me to hang it by myself, so I had him come over and help me. So to do this, I had to move everything off of the walls. So luckily, hanging this piece was actually the easiest part of the process. So there he is, just leveling it and putting in the first set of screws into the studs that are in the wall. We put about, I think, 6 screws into the valance, and once he left, I just kind of reorganized everything. Since this valance took up most of the space on my wall, I had to kind of reorganize everything and move the different valances around. So then I went to Target and I got a tension rod and I got 2 blackout curtain panels. The blackout curtain panels were important to me just because I knew that any sheer curtains were going to show the blackness of the TV through, so I wanted to make sure that I had something opaque to cover it up with. So I'm just prepping the curtains, and then I had 2 chiffon sheer curtains that I was going to put on the side. I didn't really know exactly how I wanted the curtains to look. I knew that I wanted to do some sort of Victorian or French Baroque look, but I didn't really know exactly how I was going to hang it, so this was me just kind of winging it. Now, at first, hanging the curtain rod became a little bit difficult. I was used to the type of tension rods that extend to create tension. This one kind of just stays in place, so that was a little bit frustrating. So I had to rethink the way I was hanging this. So I had to move everything off because this was going to be way more difficult than I thought, and I went and got these. These are wooden dowel holders, and I actually got this off of the bunk bed so I could use it for this. And this was another really difficult part of this process, and I really should have done this before I hung the valance. However, I didn't foresee this problem happening, so it was also just difficult because I was PMSing and I was really tired and cramping and I was just not feeling good, but I wanted to get it done so I could show you guys. So finally, once we had those in place, I was able to get the curtain right up there, and then it was perfect. It sat right into place. So now I had to figure out how I was going to arrange the curtains. The first thing that I did was I cut off a bottom piece of the panel. I wasn't really sure exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew the extra pieces were going to help arrange the valance arrangement. So I got a couple pins, tacks, and my staple gun. So the first thing that I did was I tacked one of the panels up there, and then I had a couple pins that I was going to just like help the panel stay in place, just shape it and see what kind of shapes that I liked. So here I'm just kind of playing around with all the ruffles and the folds and just seeing what worked. So after playing around with this piece of fabric for a while, I got out my handy dandy staple gun and I stapled it up there, but first I had to measure out the piece and then make sure everything was center. It was pretty easy to measure the center just because I could go by the floral arrangement, but I wanted to make sure the fabric was centered as well, just so it wouldn't, set me back and have to start all over. So after I got it up there, I stapled it into place. It was a little difficult because it's just such a small little space, but once it was up there, it was actually really easy. So here I started playing around with the fabric just a little bit more, and I had to really think and calculate what I was going to do. So I figured that I had too much fabric, so I had to cut another piece of the fabric off. Once I did that, it was a lot easier to create the shape that I wanted without covering too much of the TV. So I kind of just folded it into place. It took me a couple tries just to make sure I was getting enough shape and wrinkles into the fabric, and then I stapled it into place. Doing the same thing to the other side, so what really helped me create these really pretty shapes was having fabric pins. So I could easily just fold and pinch something into place and then make it stay. So after I checked it, I realized it was just covering a little bit of the top of the TV, which is a really easy fix. I just had to create a little more tautness and then staple that into place. It was really easy to fix. So now you can see the little LED lights that are behind my TV. These are super cheap. They're like $15 on Amazon. But it was getting dark fast. I had been working all day on this and I wasn't finished yet. So I had a few more panels left and I was just kind of playing around with them, seeing what worked. And I kind of wanted to cover the side of the valance just so there wasn't a gap showing. Again, I really didn't have a plan or an idea of exactly how I wanted it to be, but this was kind of the fun part of the whole process. So here I had a couple spare flowers and then I just stapled them up there. It looked really pretty and I felt like it helped hide the seams of where the fabric was, where I stapled it into place. The other thing that I wanted to do was hide the wires of my television, so I just put a tack in there and then I simply just tucked the wires right behind that so the curtain would cover them. It was really easy. It was a nice benefit to this project. So I went back in with my staple gun and I stapled this piece around the edges of the valance. So this took a little while to kind of shape the fabric how I wanted it, and this time I used just tiny little nails and then hammered them into place. It took quite a while to create the folds in the fabric. It was just a little difficult. Now because these were blackout curtains, they are actually layered, so they technically have 2 pieces of curtain on them. After I was done, I tied a little bow around it. I actually really liked how it looked, even though it wasn't part of the main plan. On the other side, it was a little bit more difficult just because there was a tiny little space and there was that little star in my face the whole time. At the end of the day, I was finally finished and it came out perfect, way better than I actually imagined it would.